Okay, in this video we're going to go through a quick technique for fracturing. So what you see here, the difference between this and this. So first I'll give you a quick peek into my basic form that I'm starting off with. It's really just a gradient, a radial gradient. I've plugged it into gamma and just boosted the heck out of that so it just bulges. Went through a landform to add some complication to the shape, which I then simplified with a little bit of blur. Not too much. I wanted to keep some of the shape but not all of it. And I went and apertured that to contract by 2 levels just to sharpen some of the features. So the goal here was to get something that didn't have, crazy details, which would make it difficult to see what the fracturing was doing. So I wanted something smooth. I combined that with a purlin, and the purlin is just the default purlin, but the scale has been changed slightly. And I subtracted that, and that gave me this shape. So it's just going in and reforming it. So it gives me an interesting starting point that I can use to show off the fracturing. So we've already looked at breaker before. Breaker, in this particular case, I used hard cracks and accurate so that it followed the form a little bit nicer, and I got some decent depth on there. I can increase the depth if I want the fracturing to go a little bit more, but this adds a nice subtle effect that enhances the look of the other one. I took my fracturing technique and added a small amount of it. You can see it's a really small subtracted version of this fracturing technique just to get this final look. In these other cases, I went a little bit deeper. We're going to look at what I did for those. So the Voronoi is the starting point of this. In the Voronoi, we're using a P-type form that gives you lots of ridges. It's essentially an inverted sort of form of the Voronoi. And I set the scale way up so that those cracks are really small. And then I also adjusted the scale even further by playing with the X and Y. And what you see here is one is longer than the other, and that means that some of them will stretch out and be longer forms, and others will be shorter forms in the other direction. So that gives me more of a jagged look for this. I then take that and run it through an auto level, and I've turned on all of the features, leaving them at their maximum. What this is going to do is it's going to take all those ridges and bring them all the way up so that they're relatively even. With that, of course, I go ahead and do a bias gain, and with a bias gain, what my goal is to go ahead and drop the intensity, bring the intensity down, and that's going to take whatever was at the base of that Voronoi, all those little details, and cut them off. So what you see here is some areas that are flattened off, and it's exactly what I want. Now, when you do this with the bias gain, anything that gets dropped below that base form often continues to exist. Sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't. In this particular case, I don't want it, so I take it through a clamp and set that to clip. You don't need to do anything else to this. This is just going to say whatever's below this ground level, just ignore it. My alternative is to go through a displacement, and this displacement I've set to rugged, and I've taken the roughly about 4. I didn't want to change it too much. My complexity really high, my scale really low. And that means that it's going to add some jagged little features to that form. As you can see it here. It doesn't change a ton, it's just enough to make it more sort of rugged looking. I'll do the same thing to that. Bias gain, exact same levels, clamp. It's just cutting off those bottom regions. So let's look at the differences between these two. So starting from my base form, I have the smooth fracturing versus the rugged fracturing. It's fairly simple, not terribly difficult to put this together, and once you've got that in place, if you don't really like the pattern that's there, I would recommend, of course, taking this, right-clicking it and pressing Pin or hit F on the keyboard to go ahead unlock the preview for that, and then you can go into here and you can play with the scale, stretch this region out or compress it down, play with those things, play with the scale here, and of course play with the seed. You can also add dual fracturing to add even more detail to it. So it's all about sort of tuning these features as you look at the result at the end of the chain. So hopefully you found something useful in this, and I will see you in the next video.